Well, good morning, guys. Today is Monday, February the 10th, and today we're going to be looking in Psalm chapter 10 together. Well, Psalm chapter 10 is a continuation of Psalm chapter 9. In Psalm chapter 9, David talks about the enemies that are coming after them from outside, from without. Now in Psalm chapter 10, David shifts gears and talks about the opposition and the battles that are coming from those who are within. These would be people who should be a part of the family of God, who know better, people who are like what we are today as Christians. So as we go through this chapter, and you think about this person being a believer, there's some interesting things that are going to jump out at you. First is, as David goes through here, he talks about how these people live at the very beginning as practical atheists. He says in verse 1, "O Lord, why do you stand so far away? Why do you hide when I am in trouble? The wicked," verse 2, "arrogantly hunt down the poor. Let them be caught in the evil plan they have for others. For they brag about their evil desires. They praise the greedy and curse the Lord. The wicked are too proud to see God. They seem to think that God is dead. They don't even want to acknowledge that God is alive. They want to act like God is dead so that they can be God." As David goes through here, he kind of categorizes these people in several different ways. First, we've got those that say there is no God, that we just read that section here at the beginning of Psalm 10. Then he goes down in verse 5 through about verse 7, talks about how I shall not be moved. These are people who are stubborn, they're not going to change. Then down from verse 8 to about verse 11, he talks about how they say that God doesn't see them. God doesn't know what they're doing. He's hid his face from them. Then verse 12, he talks about 12 and 13 is God will not judge me. They think that God's not going to judge them for the way that they've lived their life. And man, if that doesn't describe people in America today, I don't know what does. People act like there is no God. They say they're not going to change. They act like God's never going to judge them. But then David shifts gears and he actually answers each one of those. He starts off in verse 14 and 15 talking about God sees what's going on. He answers those that say God doesn't see them. Then in verse 15, he talks about God judging sin. Those that say God will not judge me. Then verse 16, he says God is king, and that's answering those that say there is no God. And then in verse 17 and 18, he talks about God defending his own people, which is those that say that they're not going to move and they're not going to change. So David describes the people, and then he describes how God is everything that they say he's not. But while I was reading this, there was a couple of things that really jumped out at me. In verse number 14 especially, it says, but you see the trouble. That's the outside circumstances. He's talking to God. And grief, that's the inward feelings. So the outward circumstances, the inward feelings that I have. But you see the trouble and grief they cause. You take note of it and punish them. The helpless put their trust in you. You defend the orphans. I love that. When we put our trust in God, he will defend us, and he will stand up for the two groups of people that he says we as a church are supposed to take care of, widows and orphans. So here he's talking about the orphans. Then down in verse 17, Lord, you know the hopes of the helpless. Surely you will hear their cries and comfort them. You will bring justice to the orphans and the oppressed, so mere people can no longer terrify them. That encourages me because I know that God cares about even the least of these. When you think about people in our society today who are kind of forgotten, one is orphans. That's why there's such a great need for foster families and things like that. So there are some that get forgotten in our culture and in our world today. And the Bible says, David says here, that God will not forget them. God is watching over them. He cares about them. So it's important for us not to forget about people who are forgotten about by society either. We should do our part to encourage them, to take care of their needs, to be there for them, to show the love of Christ, to help them as they grow, especially those that don't have parents, that have lost a mom or a dad or are alone in this world. As believers, it's our job to help and to take care. So today, as you're going through your day, look for people that society has forgotten. Look for people who are on the fringe. Look for people who just need somebody to speak a kind word or say something nice to them. Maybe you could buy them a cup of coffee. Maybe you could get them a McDonald's Happy Meal for a kid. Maybe you could buy them lunch. I don't know what it is. But do something for somebody else today, especially those who society has forgotten. Till tomorrow, God bless you and have a great day.